The sun had just started its descent behind the ridge, casting long shadows over the deserted stretch of highway. The faint sound of a distant engine hummed through the stillness as Jason pulled over, his worn boots scraping against the gravel as he stepped out of his truck. His eyes swept over the barren road, the evening breeze tugging at the loose strands of his hair. It was just another routine check, another lonely stretch of asphalt to patrol. But then, something caught his eye, something that shouldn't have been there. A dog, lying motionless on the side of the road, its ribs rising and falling with shallow, ragged breaths. It was a pitiful sight, a dog so battered and broken, it seemed beyond saving. Jason hesitated, the weight of his past failures clouding his thoughts. He had seen too many animals like this before, too many that couldn't be saved, their lives slipping away in front of him. Yet, there was something about this dog, something in the way its eyes flickered, as if holding on to a sliver of hope. Jason swallowed hard, his breath catching in his throat. He knew what he had to do, but the doubt lingered. As he approached, the dog's gaze met his, and for the briefest of moments, there was a spark, something unmistakable, a flicker of recognition, and just like that, the choice was made. It wasn't too late. Not yet. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he knelt beside the dog. Its fur, once a deep brown, was matted with dirt and dried blood. He could barely distinguish its features through the layers of filth. The dog's body trembled with each labored breath, its thin frame barely holding itself together. Jason's hands hovered over the dog's ribs, a subtle tremor in his fingertips betraying his uncertainty. It was so broken, physically, emotionally. He didn't know if he had the strength to fix it. Yet, as he ran his hand gently over the dog's head, the animal let out a weak, pained groan and nudged his palm. Jason froze, an achy deep in his chest. This wasn't just an animal on the verge of death. It was a soul fighting to survive. He whispered softly, "I'm here, buddy. I'm not leaving you." But his words felt hollow, knowing that there was a deep fear in him, that the dog's wounds were too great to heal. Jason gathered the dog in his arms, holding it close as he drove to the nearest vet, the dog's soft whimpers filling the truck cab. The night stretched on long and heavy, filled with an unbearable tension that Jason couldn't shake. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, or what he feared more, losing the dog or losing himself. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, and Jason stood at the edge of the examination room, anxiously pacing. The vet had been quiet for what felt like an eternity. His brow furrowed as he examined the dog's injuries. Finally, he looked up, his voice thick with regret. "It's bad, Jason. This dog's been through hell. We can patch him up, but there's a chance his body's been too compromised." Jason's stomach twisted. He knew what the vet was saying. There were limits to even the best care, but he couldn't give up now. Not when the dog had shown even a flicker of life. "Do what you can," Jason said, his voice low, but resolute. The vet hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As the hours ticked by, Jason sat beside the dog, watching the sterile lights flicker overhead, feeling the silence press in around him. He had seen too many animals in this situation. He had seen them slip away one breath at a time, as the world continued on as if nothing had changed. But this dog was different. Something in him stirred, a deep well of compassion, of guilt, of something long buried that he couldn't name. It was easy to walk away from broken things. It was easier to accept defeat. But sitting there, next to the dog, he realized just how hard it was to fight for something that seemed impossible to save. A week had passed since that cold night, and the dog, now named Max, had begun to show signs of improvement. His wounds, though still tender, were healing. The broken spirit he had carried seemed to lift with each passing day. Jason spent hours at the vet's office, slowly earning the dog's trust, coaxing him out of the shell he had been forced into by the brutality of the world. It wasn't easy. Max was still wary of every touch, his eyes constantly darting as if expecting harm. But when Jason reached out to feed him, or when he spoke in soft, soothing tones, there was a shift. Max would tilt his head, ears flicking, eyes widening as if processing the gesture. Jason couldn't help but smile each time, a rush of warmth flooding through him. There were setbacks. Max would pull away at times, his old instincts kicking in, fearful and unsure. But Jason wasn't going anywhere. Every small step forward was a victory. A glimmer of the dog that had been buried beneath the layers of pain. In those quiet moments when Max would curl up beside him, Jason realized just how much he had changed. This wasn't just about rescuing an animal, it was about rescuing himself. He had seen the worst in life. But here, in the stillness of the vet's office, he was learning how to see the good. Just when Jason began to believe that Max's recovery would be a steady climb, disaster struck. Max took a sudden turn for the worse, his body rejecting the healing process. The vet's face was grim as he delivered the news. It's a complication from the internal injuries. It's likely to be a long shot from here on out. Jason's heart sank. His hands clenched, fingers trembling as he struggled to keep the panic at bay. The dog he had fought for, this soul he had poured everything into, was slipping through his fingers. Max's breathing grew shallow once again, the same ragged gasps that had haunted him on the side of that lonely road. Jason stood beside him, the weight of the moment pressing down on his chest. Every heartbeat felt like a drumbeat to the inevitable. "I'm not giving up," Jason whispered, his voice raw. He rested his forehead against Max's, feeling the heat of the dog's body. The pain in his chest was unbearable, but there was something else too, something flickering, something that told him not to let go. It was 2 days later that the miracle happened. Max, against all odds, began to stabilize. Slowly, painfully, but surely. The vet had no explanation. Jason didn't care. He didn't need answers. He only knew that the dog, who had once been so broken, so fragile, was starting to find his feet again. Max's eyes met Jason's, the recognition still there, but this time it was different. There was no more fear, only trust, only love. And in that moment, Jason realized something that changed him forever. He had saved a dog, but in doing so, he had saved himself. The walls he had built around his own heart had crumbled, bit by bit, with every tender touch, every quiet moment of care. Max's tail wagged for the first time since Jason had found him, and that simple act of joy filled Jason's soul with a warmth that washed away the years of pain he had carried. It wasn't just a victory for Max. It was a victory for them both. As they stood there together, Jason knew that the real rescue had only just begun. The seasons shifted quietly in the background as Jason and Max walked through life together. The autumn leaves, once golden, now blanketed the ground in shades of russet and brown. The air smelled of earth, damp and crisp, as Jason, with Max trotting happily beside him, stepped into a new rhythm of life. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. Jason had always believed that healing was a singular experience, something that happened alone, within the confines of one's own pain. But he had come to learn that healing wasn't something done in isolation. It was something shared. Between him and Max, there was a silent understanding, a quiet bond forged in the fires of suffering and survival. They had saved each other, though neither could have known that it would be so transformative. In the quiet mornings when the sun streamed through the open windows, Max would curl up next to Jason on the couch, his head resting on Jason's lap, the bond between them palpable. Jason would absent-mindedly run his fingers through Max's fur, the soft sound of his breathing filling the room. The world outside had its worries, but in this small corner of it there was peace. Jason was no longer the man he was before. He had seen the raw fragility of life, and in the process, had uncovered a deeper understanding of his own heart. He had allowed himself to care again, to open up, to risk loving something so vulnerable. And in return, Max had given him more than just the satisfaction of a rescue. He had given him purpose. But life, as it always does, found a way to remind them of its fragility. One morning, after a heavy rain, Jason found Max trembling at the edge of the yard. The dog, once so full of energy, now stood still, his body tense. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He rushed to his side, his fingers brushing through Max's fur, feeling the heat of his skin. Max's eyes were wide, filled with the same fear that had once consumed him. Jason's breath caught. "What's wrong, boy?" he whispered, his voice cracked with worry. The vet visit confirmed what Jason had feared. Max's injuries had left him with a lingering weakness. His body was deteriorating slowly, a ticking clock that Jason had no control over. The prognosis was bleak. But Jason couldn't bring himself to hear the words, couldn't stomach the idea of losing the dog who had fought so hard to stay alive. Max's health began to decline rapidly, and the days blurred into one long, desperate stretch of hope. Jason found himself watching Max closely, noting every movement, every change. Every time Max struggled to stand or faltered in his step, Jason's chest tightened with the kind of dread that comes when you know you can't stop what's coming. It was the first real test of their bond. The knowledge that no matter how far they'd come, there was still the undeniable reality of life's transience. But the two of them, Max and Jason, had been through worse. They had survived the impossible. And even though this felt like the hardest battle yet, Jason wouldn't give up. The day Max's body finally gave in was a gray one. The sky hung low, the air heavy with a mournful quiet. Jason had always dreaded this moment, the one where he would have to let go. But when it came, he realized that it wasn't a moment of pain, but a strange, deep peace. Max had been with him through so much, and Jason knew, deep in his bones, that the love they shared would never die. It wasn't defined by the number of breaths left in Max's body, but by the bond they had created, by the lives they had saved together. Max lay on his bed, his breathing shallow but calm. Jason sat beside him, holding his paw, feeling the warmth of his fur. He whispered into the silence, words that Max had heard 1,000 times before. "You saved me, Max. You really did." Max's eyes fluttered, and for a moment, it was as though he understood every word. The world outside seemed to stop in that instant, the soft fall of raindrops against the window the only sound. Jason's fingers gently stroked Max's ear, just as he had on that first night, just as he had on all the nights that followed. And then, with one final, quiet exhale, Max was gone. The days after Max's passing were long and empty, the house feeling quieter than ever before. Jason found himself wandering through the rooms, touched by the absence of paws on the floor, the absence of the soft whimper in the early mornings. His heart ached. But it wasn't the kind of pain that demanded to be forgotten. It was the kind that was allowed to linger, because Max had left an indelible mark on his life. Jason started volunteering at the local animal shelter, using his experience with Max to help other animals who had suffered. Every time he walked into the shelter, there was a new dog, one that needed him. And even though no animal could ever replace Max, Jason found himself caring again, loving again, in ways he hadn't thought possible. He built a memorial for Max in the backyard, a small stone that simply read, "Saved by love, live by it." The world kept turning, as it always does, but Jason was no longer the man he was when he first found Max on the side of that road. He had learned that love, real love, is not something that can be measured by how long we have, but by how deeply we are willing to invest in others, no matter the cost. And as Jason stood there, watching the sun set over the horizon, the weight of his grief slowly lightened. He could still feel Max's presence beside him in the quiet moments, in the soft rustle of the leaves, in the space between breaths. Max had given him everything, and in return, Jason had learned to live fully, without fear. The road that had begun with loss had led to a life filled with purpose, with meaning. The fight was never over. It was simply a matter of finding the strength to keep going. And as the stars slowly filled the sky, Jason smiled to himself. Max was still with him. He always would be. As the months passed, Jason continued his work at the shelter, each day becoming a small but significant step toward healing. He had learned to love again, not just the animals, but also himself. He had come to understand that saving someone wasn't about fixing them. It was about being present, being there, even when the outcome was uncertain. That was the lesson Max had taught him. Jason began adopting a few dogs from the shelter, not because he needed to replace Max. No, nothing could ever replace him. But because he understood now more than ever the power of giving someone a second chance. Each dog that came into his life carried a piece of Max with them. A piece of their shared journey, a piece of that quiet resilience. One morning, as Jason prepared his usual breakfast of eggs and toast, he heard a soft scratching at the door. He froze. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it stirred something deep within him. Slowly he walked to the door, unsure if it was his imagination playing tricks on him, but when he opened it, there was a small, Scruffy puppy standing there, its eyes wide with uncertainty. It was just like Max, worn, fragile, and on the edge of survival. Jason bent down slowly, not making any sudden movements. His heart softened, recognizing the desperation in the puppy's gaze. As he knelt down to meet its eyes, a sense of understanding passed between them. It was the same look Max had given him all those months ago. The look that said, "I need you, and I'm willing to fight for this." Jason reached out, and the puppy cautiously sniffed his hand before nuzzling it. A smile tugged at the corner of Jason's lips. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice full of warmth. "I'll help you." It wasn't just the puppy that needed saving this time. Jason knew that the healing was mutual. He wasn't rescuing this dog as much as he was reminding himself of the power of love, the strength of second chances, and the beauty of a life that could still be rebuilt. Jason's life began to change in ways he never expected. As the months passed, he found himself speaking at adoption events, telling the story of Max and how that one dog had reshaped his entire existence. People listened to him with wide eyes, drawn to the authenticity in his words, the rawness of his emotions. His connection to animals grew stronger, and the shelter saw an increase in adoptions, driven by Jason's genuine passion and his deeply personal experience. He had become a voice for the voiceless, a bridge between the broken and the saved. Max's legacy, it seemed, was more than just a memory. It was alive in the work Jason was doing, in the lives he was changing, in the countless animals finding their forever homes. One day, after an event where Jason shared Max's story, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She had just adopted a senior dog who had been abandoned, just like Max. She thanked him, saying, "Your story gave me the strength to give him a chance. I didn't know how much I needed to hear it until today." Jason smiled softly, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. It was no longer about him or Max alone. It was about the ripples of love that spread outward, touching others in ways he couldn't have predicted. Every animal saved, every person touched by his journey. These were the echoes of a bond that had started with a broken dog on the side of the road and had transformed into a movement. It was a clear, crisp evening when Jason found himself standing at Max's memorial in the backyard once again. The stone was weathered now, but it still held the same simple message. Saved by love, lived by it. Jason crouched down, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the stone. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the sound of Max's tail wagging, the warmth of his body beside him on those long, quiet nights. Max had taught him everything he needed to know about love, loss, and resilience. The dog had been his teacher, his companion, his savior. And though Max was no longer physically there, Jason could feel his presence in every corner of his life. Jason had come to realize that love never truly dies. It lingers in the heartbeats of those we touch, in the lives we change. Max had left an indelible mark on his soul, a legacy of healing that stretched far beyond the dog's final breath. "Thank you," Jason whispered into the cool evening air. He didn't need to say more. Max already knew. As the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky, Jason felt the familiar warmth that had always been there. Max's spirit, his love, still with him, still guiding him. He could almost hear the soft, comforting sounds of paws padding beside him, the gentle breeze carrying with it the faint scent of fur and earth. Max had not only changed Jason's life, but he had taught him the most valuable lesson of all, that love is a force stronger than anything else. It endures, it survives, and it leads us home. Jason stood up, his heart full, knowing that wherever life took him next, Max would always be a part of him. His journey with the dog had never really ended. It had only transformed, as all things do. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, with the night sky stretching wide above him, Jason smiled, because he knew Max was still with him. Time continued its march, slow and steady, like the changing of seasons. Jason's days were filled with the gentle hum of routine, the quiet satisfaction of work well done, but something had shifted inside him. He no longer moved through life burdened by the weight of his past. The fear of loss, the ache of abandonment, these things no longer held him captive. Max's presence, his love, had woven its way through every corner of Jason's heart. Every morning, as Jason prepared his coffee, he couldn't help but glance toward the corner where Max had once laid, his favorite spot on the couch now an empty space. But the emptiness wasn't painful anymore. It was just a space, a part of the rhythm of life. And in that space, Jason felt Max's spirit still guiding him, still with him. But the world had a funny way of reminding you of the unseen threads that bind us all. One rainy evening, as Jason walked through the shelter, his attention was drawn to a small, nervous dog cowering in the corner. Its eyes, dark and frightened, flickered with the same desperation Jason had seen in Max all those months ago. The dog had been found wandering the streets, malnourished and scarred. Its body was frail, its spirit broken. Jason kneeled down, his heart heavy with a familiar pang. He could see the same fear, the same loneliness in the dog's eyes. The same fight, buried beneath layers of pain. It was as if Max were whispering to him from the past. "This is where you belong." Jason reached out his hand, slowly, gently. And the dog, after a moment of hesitation, took a tentative step forward, its eyes never leaving his. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Jason said softly, his voice steady, filled with the certainty of experience. As the dog nuzzled his hand, Jason realized that Max's legacy wasn't just about saving animals. It was about saving hearts. Every dog he saved, every soul he touched, was a continuation of the love Max had given him. It was an unspoken bond that connected them all. Jason adopted the dog, naming him Charlie. And as he watched Charlie settle into his new life, Jason knew that he wasn't just giving the dog a chance. Charlie was giving him a chance too. A chance to continue the journey, to keep moving forward, even when the past felt so present. It wasn't long before Charlie became a part of Jason's life, his playful energy bringing a sense of joy and lightness that had been missing. But the dog wasn't just a companion, he was a teacher, just like Max had been. The lessons didn't stop after Max's passing. Charlie taught Jason that healing was not a destination, but a journey that could never truly be completed. Together, they explored the world, one step at a time. Whether it was a walk through the woods, a quiet afternoon on the porch, or simply sitting in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason felt a deep sense of contentment. He had everything he needed. And yet, there were days when the grief would return, as grief does. It wasn't as heavy as it had once been, but it still lingered like a shadow, especially on quiet evenings when the air grew cold and the world outside seemed to pause. One of those evenings, as Jason sat on the porch, Charlie curled up beside him. Jason's thoughts drifted back to Max. He could almost hear the faint thud of his tail, feel the softness of his fur. It was in these moments of stillness that Max's spirit seemed to surround him, a quiet presence that filled the space. "I miss you, buddy," Jason whispered into the fading light, his voice soft and raw. Charlie's ears perked up at the sound of his name, and Jason chuckled softly, wiping away a tear. He realized, in that moment, that the love he had for Max would never be gone. It would live on, quietly, in every act of kindness, in every rescued animal, in every lesson learned from the bond they had shared. Max had given him the gift of transformation, and though the dog was no longer physically with him, he was present in every step Jason took toward becoming the person he was meant to be. The years moved forward, and Jason continued his work with the shelter, now with a greater sense of purpose than ever before. He was no longer the man who had stumbled through life, weighed down by his past. He had become a man who understood the power of second chances, the strength of love, and the importance of giving everything, even when the future seemed uncertain. One day, as Jason sat in his office, looking out at the shelter grounds, he received an email that would change everything. It was from an organization that focused on animal rescue advocacy. They wanted to partner with Jason's shelter to launch a national campaign for pet adoption, featuring real-life stories of people and animals whose lives had been transformed through rescue. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The idea of sharing his journey, the story of Max, on a national stage felt overwhelming. But it was exactly what he had been working toward all these years. It was a chance to amplify the message of hope, of healing, and of the quiet power of love that could turn the most broken souls into the brightest beacons of strength. As Jason agreed to partner with the organization, he found himself reflecting on the path that had led him here. He thought of Max, of every tear, every moment of doubt. and every ounce of love that had brought him to this place. He thought of Charlie, the dog who had filled the hole that Max had left, and of all the others who had come through the shelter, all the lives that had been changed because of the work they were doing. Jason knew that this was just the beginning. The legacy of Max, of that dog who had started it all, would continue to echo through every life saved, every heart mended, and every home found. The story that had begun with a broken dog and a man with nothing left to lose had blossomed into something much larger. Something that would live on, long after he was gone. As Jason walked through the shelter one evening, Charlie by his side, he paused at a quiet corner where a new dog had just arrived. He knelt down, the soft thud of his knees on the ground as he met the dog's eyes. In them, he saw something familiar, a fear, a hesitation. But as he reached out slowly, gently, he saw the spark of trust. Max had been right. Love was the key, and Jason, with all his heart, continued to pass it on one soul at a time. In the distance, the faint sound of a dog's bark echoed across the horizon, soft and familiar, like a whispered promise of forever. It was a cool evening in late autumn when Jason found himself standing in the shelter's backyard, gazing out at the horizon where the last light of the day was fading into dusk. Charlie, his faithful companion, lay quietly by his side, his head resting on Jason's foot, the quiet sound of his breathing the only sound that filled the silence. Jason ran his fingers through Charlie's fur, a familiar comfort, yet his mind drifted back to the days when he had first found Max on the side of the road, broken and alone. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but in some ways, it felt like just yesterday. That moment, when Max had met his eyes for the first time, when their lives had collided in a way that neither of them had expected, was still so vivid. It had been the start of a journey that had reshaped Jason in ways he could never have imagined. Max had taught him how to love again, how to heal, and how to fight for something that seemed impossible to save. Max's death had left a gaping hole in his heart, but that hole had slowly been filled with the lessons Max had left behind. Jason had learned that love, real love, wasn't about perfect outcomes. It was about the moments you shared, the trust you built, and the unspoken bond that connected two souls. The world had tried to take that away from him more than once, but Max had shown him that love was something no one could ever truly steal. It was always there, even in the darkest of times. As Jason sat on the porch, his fingers tracing the edges of the old stone memorial that read, "Saved by love, lived by it," he realized just how much of Max was still with him. The dog's spirit, that quiet, unwavering loyalty, had never really left. It lived in every dog Jason saved, in every heart he healed, and in the countless lives that had been touched by his story. "Thanks, buddy," Jason whispered into the still evening air, his voice full of gratitude, grief, and something else, peace. Max had given him more than he could ever repay. He had given him a second chance at life, and that was the gift that kept on giving. As he stood, the weight of the years in his bones, Jason knew the journey wasn't over. The path ahead would always be filled with challenges. There would be more heartache, more pain, and more animals in need of rescue. But there would also be love, always love, and with it the knowledge that he was never truly alone. Charlie lifted his head, sensing his owner's thoughts. The dog's eyes, calm and trusting, met Jason's with a quiet understanding. Charlie was not a replacement for Max, no one could be. But he was a reminder that love had a way of finding you when you least expected it, and that it had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Jason's life had been changed forever by one broken dog, and in turn, he had changed the lives of countless others. He had learned that sometimes the broken things were the most beautiful, that love could shine through the cracks, and that healing was a process that never truly ended. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the past settle into a quiet place of acceptance. He had given Max the best chance at life, and in return, Max had given him a life worth living. And that, Jason realized, was the greatest gift of all. He turned and looked at Charlie, his tail wagging softly. "Ready to go home?" Jason asked with a smile. The dog's eyes sparkled with a simple, unspoken answer always. Together, they walked back inside, into the warmth of the home they had built, the legacy of love they carried. and the knowledge that even the most fragile hearts could find a way to heal. And as Jason closed the door behind him, he knew that Max, wherever he was still watching over them, his spirit woven into the fabric of every step they took, every life they touched. It was a love that would never fade, a love that would always guide them forward, one paw print at a time. The road ahead was unknown, but Jason wasn't afraid. With love as his compass, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. And as he settled into the quiet of his home, with Charlie by his side, the warmth of the memory of Max filled every corner, reminding him that love once given never truly fades, it remains forever.